On December 31st, 2017, an alarm shattered the peaceful winter night in Gwangju, South Korea. Black smoke billowed from the 11th floor of an apartment building in Duamdong, sending 150 terrified residents fleeing in their night clothes. Looking up, they saw a young woman on the balcony, sobbing desperately and crying for help. "My children are inside! My children are still in there!" screamed Jung, 22, her voice piercing through the sound of approaching fire trucks. Firefighters quickly used a ladder truck to rescue the woman, who had burns on her arms. Behind the smoke-darkened windows lay a darker mystery. 3 small children, 2 boys ages 5 and 3, and a 15-month-old girl, remained trapped in the flames. When firefighters finally broke through the door and extinguished the fire, they discovered the tragic scene. What initially appeared to be a heartbreaking fire accident gradually evolved into a complex case. What really happened in that apartment on New Year's Eve 2017? Was it merely a tragic accident or a carefully disguised sinister plan? The 3 children were found dead in the small bedroom, having succumbed to smoke inhalation. Once the fire was completely extinguished, investigators began uncovering suspicious clues. The fire had originated from the 11th floor apartment where Jung lived with her 3 young children. What truly transpired on that fateful night? What started as a presumed accident gradually transformed into a complex puzzle as police and prosecutors reached increasingly contradictory conclusions, pushing the case into the spotlight of heated public debate. Before delving deeper into the tragedy, let's understand the Jung family through accounts from those around them. Neighbors described a harmonious, peaceful home. The couple showed affection toward their children, and even the kindergarten principal confirmed nothing unusual. Jung, the young mother, meticulously prepared each school item for her children, never once being negligent. Lee, her husband, was a devoted father who always cared for his children. There were no signs of child abuse, and the autopsy results revealed no suspicious injuries on the children. Beneath the appearance of a happy family, they struggled with severe financial difficulties. The root of their situation stemmed from Jung becoming pregnant at just 18 with Lee, who was only a year older. They became parents while still in school, forcing them to abandon their education to care for their firstborn. They quickly faced harsh reality. With only middle school diplomas, stable career doors remained firmly shut. Their lives depended on temporary jobs at call centers, internet cafes, and convenience stores, barely enough to survive. The burden grew heavier as their 2nd and 3rd children arrived, pushing the small family into an increasingly desperate financial situation with no way out. In early 2017, hoping for support, they applied for basic living subsidies but were rejected because Jung's parents were determined to have income. Their financial situation worsened to the point where they couldn't pay either management fees or utility bills for their rented apartment. Their children's kindergarten tuition had accumulated into a 5-month debt they couldn't settle. From February to July 2017, they relied on 6 emergency living subsidies totaling 1.37 million won, approximately $1,240, along with meager wages from part-time call center work to sustain the family. Then, as if fate wanted to test them further, 2 months before the tragedy, Lee injured his leg and required hospitalization. Without money for medical bills, they once again turned to emergency subsidies. After deducting 260,000 won, about $235, for medical expenses from the 1.25 million won, about $1,130 subsidy, they were left with just 990,000 won, about $990. $895 for living expenses. A tiny sum for a family of 5, pushing them further into extreme poverty. Driven to desperation, Jung crossed legal boundaries. She began conducting scams on a Chinese second-hand marketplace website. The method was simple but effective, advertising baby formula for 90,000 won, about $81, collecting payment, then disappearing without a trace. This illegal money became the fragile lifeline helping the family survive through desperate times. The relentless financial pressure gradually eroded the bond between them. Arguments became more frequent and intense, eventually leading to divorce. In their initial agreement, Jung consented to raise the 3 children, while Lee committed to providing 900,000 won, about $815, monthly. Just 4 days before the tragedy, they finalized their divorce but were forced to continue living together due to financial constraints. Even in this final stage, the question of who would care for the children remained a flashpoint for endless arguments. Although Jung initially agreed to take responsibility for raising the 3 children, she unexpectedly changed her mind. Wanting to start a new life, Jung insisted on sending the children to an orphanage, a shocking decision that pushed their already fractured relationship to complete breaking point. On the fateful evening before the tragedy, December 31st, the house was once again filled with tension as they argued about the children's fate. Unable to bear the suffocating atmosphere, Jung left home at 7 p.m., seeking escape in alcohol with friends and the loud music of a karaoke room. During her flight from reality, she still stopped at a convenience store to buy a small safety pin, a gesture showing maternal care, to secure the oversized clothes of her eldest son. When Jung returned to the apartment intoxicated around 5:50 a.m. the next morning, she found only her children sleeping peacefully with no sign of her husband. Unbeknownst to her, after she left, Lee had put the 3 children to bed in the small room at 9:44 p.m., then sought his own escape by meeting friends at a nearby internet cafe. Feeling abandoned and lonely, Jung repeatedly sent desperate messages to Lee. "I want to die. I will disappear from this world. I will die." Despite these alarming signals, Lee ignored them, believing they were just the familiar threats Jung often used throughout their turbulent divorce process. Just 10 minutes after those desperate messages, tragedy struck when fire erupted violently in the 11th floor apartment, tragically claiming the lives of 3 innocent children. A year-end night ended in black smoke and the mournful sound of fire truck sirens. The information above outlines the background before the tragedy occurred. Now, the investigation revolves around 2 crucial elements: Jung's testimony, the only surviving mother, and clues from the fire scene, 2 important keys to unlock the door to truth. As the investigation deepened, a clear rift began forming between police and prosecutor perspectives. Police initially focused on analyzing Jung's testimony. In her first interrogation, the young mother claimed the fire originated from the gas stove while she was cooking ramen. According to Jung, the flames spread too quickly and strongly for her to control. She insisted she tried to save her children, but feared that carrying them out might worsen the situation, leading to her decision to call for help and wait for professional assistance. However, this account quickly collapsed before police findings. There was no evidence of ramen cooking in the kitchen, and more significantly, forensic experts determined that the fire didn't start from the kitchen area, as Jung claimed, but actually originated from inside the small bedroom. Faced with these obvious contradictions, Jung hastily changed her story. In her new statement, she admitted to smoking on the balcony, but moved inside due to the cold weather. According to Jung, she sat down beside the refrigerator, wrapped a blanket around herself, and continued satisfying her nicotine craving. When her youngest child woke up crying for her, she extinguished the cigarette by rubbing it on the blanket. A dangerous habit she didn't expect would ignite the tragedy. From these details, the picture of what happened became clearer. Jung returned home intoxicated, decided to smoke to unwind, then carelessly extinguished her cigarette on a blanket before falling asleep with her child in her arms, completely unaware that the smoldering cigarette would turn into fierce flames. When she finally realized the dangerous situation and sobered up, she spent 10 precious minutes calling her husband and firefighters for help, instead of trying to save her children in those crucial moments. Contradictions in Jung's story quickly became apparent when investigators compared her testimony with the crime scene. If, as Jung described, she smoked, then went to the entrance of the small bedroom when she heard her child crying and extinguished the cigarette on the blanket there, logic would require the first traces of fire to appear at the entrance area, or at least near the refrigerator in the living room where she claimed to have placed the blanket. But forensic experts discovered a completely different truth. The fire didn't start from the entrance, but from deep inside the small bedroom. Even the most severely burned area was identified deep inside the room, a detail directly contradicting the young mother's testimony. Nevertheless, police emphasized Jung's habit of extinguishing cigarettes by rubbing them on blankets. They hypothesized that perhaps the fire had started from the entrance area as Jung described, but the blanket had become a dangerous conductor, causing the flames to quickly spread deep into the room. Witnesses also confirmed Jung indeed had the dangerous habit of extinguishing cigarettes by rubbing them on blankets. After compiling all factors, police reached their initial conclusion. This is a fire caused by the mother's carelessness. An unfortunate accident from negligent behavior, not an intentional act. While police placed faith in the unfortunate accident theory, prosecutors explored an entirely different investigative direction. They weren't limited to analyzing testimony, but expanded their view to other suspicious details. Two factors immediately stood out. Jung had sent death-implying messages to her husband before the fire occurred, and she had repeatedly changed her testimony, typical behaviors of someone concealing the truth. Under pressure from prosecutors, Jung once again changed her story, but this time with more shocking revelations. She confessed to experiencing 2 extremely miserable months, not just because of financial difficulties, but also due to threats related to her scam on the secondhand marketplace. Additionally, she had fallen into severe depression after the divorce. In her latest testimony, Jung admitted that on the fateful night, she smoked outside the bedroom. When her youngest child woke up crying, instead of safely extinguishing the cigarette, she placed the burning cigarette on the blanket before entering the room. Lying beside her children, she was preoccupied with her phone until she noticed flames erupting. But the most shocking detail in Jung's confession was her psychological reaction upon seeing the flames. Instead of the typical survival instinct of, "I must survive," Jung thought, "In this situation, it would be better if I ended my life along with my children." In that dark moment, she abandoned her will to fight, accepting the tragic end for the entire family. Only after a while did her survival instinct resurface, causing her to change her mind and try to save her children. But by then it was too late. The flames had become too strong. With no other choice, Jung found her way alone to the balcony, leaving her 3 children in the sea of flames. The prosecutor's investigation deepened as they analyzed data from Jung's phone, a step police had skipped when the young mother claimed she couldn't remember the password. A strange excuse that should have raised more suspicions. What they found revealed shocking details. On the day of the tragedy, Jung not only sent suicidal messages to her husband, but also sent messages to both her husband and friends hinting at the upcoming fire. An even more frightening discovery was the distortion of maternal instinct. During the time between when the fire started until rescue teams arrived, Jung wasn't desperately trying to save her children as presumed, but calmly using her mobile phone on the balcony. Meanwhile, 3 tiny lives were dying moment by moment in the toxic smoke. This image raised profound questions about maternal love. Could a normal mother calmly use her phone while her children were suffocating in a sea of flames? For further verification, prosecutors requested the National Institute of Forensic Science to conduct a thorough examination of the physical characteristics of the fire, particularly focusing on the blanket believed to be the source of the tragedy. The analysis results completely collapsed Jung's story. Blankets made of superfine synthetic fibers have properties that don't easily catch fire from a single cigarette. With this discovery, both Jung's testimony about a cigarette accidentally falling on the blanket and the police theory about flames spreading from the entrance deep into the room were proven inaccurate. Furthermore, although no accelerant was found at the scene, there were lighters scattered throughout the apartment, perfect tools that could be used to deliberately set a fire. Additionally, Jung's injuries also made investigators suspicious. At the time of the fire, she was wearing socks. If, as claimed, she had risked entering the sea of flames to save her children, there should certainly be signs of burning on those socks. However, experts found no burns whatsoever. More significantly, Jung's face also had no burns from radiant heat, almost impossible if she had approached the fire close enough to try saving her children as she claimed. All these findings led to a horrifying conclusion. Perhaps Jung had never actually approached the flames, never really tried to save her children. Based on the evidence, prosecutors presented a frightening hypothesis. Jung deliberately used a lighter to set fire to the blanket covering her 3 children sleeping soundly in the small bedroom, then quickly ran to the balcony to escape. Although superfine blankets might not easily catch fire from a cigarette, with a direct flame from a lighter, they could burn fiercely and uncontrollably. Particularly dangerous, synthetic materials produce toxic gas when burning, and when melting, they stick to the body, creating a deadly trap that gave the 3 children no chance of escape. Although just a prosecutor's hypothesis, if true, Jung's actions were truly horrifying. She actively blocked every survival path for her innocent young children, an act of cruelty almost unbelievable from a mother. The 2 perspectives led to 2 entirely different legal consequences. According to the police view of an accident caused by carelessness, Jung would face only a minor charge, typically imprisonment under 5 years or a fine not exceeding 20 million won, about $18,000. Conversely, following the prosecutor's investigation, a deliberate arson with the intent to murder her children, the punishment would be much more severe. In July 2018, the trial court delivered its final verdict, favoring the prosecutor's argument. The court declared Jung had intentionally set the fire to kill her 3 children. In the judgment, the court especially emphasized the extreme horror and pain that 3 innocent children suffered when trapped in the melting blanket, while pointing out Jung's lack of remorse. With these considerations, Jung was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a heavy sentence for an unforgivable crime. Immediately after the trial court sentence, Jung filed an appeal, still firmly insisting that the entire incident was just a tragic accident and she had absolutely no intention of killing her children. However, the appeals court maintained the view that there was sufficient basis to determine Jung had acted with awareness of the potentially fatal consequences. Although considering many mitigating factors such as Jung's young age, extreme economic circumstances, and especially her ex-husband's appeal for leniency, the judicial panel still found insufficient grounds to reduce the punishment. The case was then brought to the Supreme Court, where the 20-year prison sentence was ultimately upheld, marking the end of a highly contentious legal journey. A notable detail about Jung's psychology was revealed through an anecdote. During the pre-trial period, she was offered support from a free defense attorney but refused, with an attitude seemingly resigned to accepting punishment for the mistakes that led to her children's deaths. However, when faced with a 20-year sentence, that acceptance immediately vanished, replaced by an instant appeal. This sudden change in attitude made many criminal psychology experts question the authenticity of the remorse she displayed. To this day, despite serving many years of her sentence, Jung firmly maintains her position that it was only a fire caused by negligence. After hearing this tragic story, we can't help but be torn between legal evidence and contradictions in human nature. The detail about Jung stopping at the convenience store to buy a safety pin for her oldest son's clothes, a loving maternal gesture, creates a painful paradox. How could a woman both care about such small details in her children's lives, yet possibly plan to take their lives just hours later? Perhaps this is why the case still leaves many unanswered questions, despite the court's verdict based on legal evidence. Human nature is inherently complex and contradictory, especially when pushed to desperate situations. Jung's purchase of a safety pin for her child might be a genuine expression of maternal love, or it could be an unconscious act, or even a deliberate attempt to create an image of being a good mother before doing the unthinkable. This crime is so horrific that our minds naturally want to seek alternative explanations, wanting to believe it was just a tragic accident. Perhaps the pain and helplessness in the face of tragedy have made it difficult for us to accept that a mother could be the one who took the lives of the young children she once loved. Next is another case that occurred in Gwangju City. On the quiet morning of October 20th, 2008 in Dong District, a delivery person drove into an alley near Dane Market, carrying a package to a small restaurant. He knocked repeatedly but received no answer, an unusual silence enveloping the space. After many attempts, he decided to call the recipient, the restaurant owner's wife. The woman, in Seoul for family business, was surprised and worried to learn the restaurant was still closed at this hour, highly unusual, as this was when her husband normally opened for customers. With an uneasy feeling, she asked Mr. Kim, a boarding house owner in the same building, to check the situation. At exactly 10:50 a.m., Mr. Kim arrived at the restaurant and looked through the window. What he saw left him frozen in horror. The restaurant owner, Mr. Choi, lay motionless on the floor with a pool of blood around his head. Mr. Kim immediately reported the emergency, and rescue teams quickly arrived. However, they faced an unexpected obstacle. The door was securely locked from inside with a 27-inch long chain lock. Only after cutting through the lock could they access the space inside, but it was too late. Mr. Choi showed no signs of life. The crime scene was a horrifyingly bloody sight. The victim, a 60-year-old man, was discovered in the back room of the restaurant. The back of his head was shattered by multiple blunt force trauma wounds, the floor soaked in blood. Blood had also splattered onto the surrounding walls, creating a gruesome scene that horrified even experienced police officers. Notably, the crime scene was suspiciously clean. No fingerprints, no hair, no traces of the killer were found in the house. In that mysterious silence, the only clue police discovered was a bloody footprint. When the investigation team surveyed the scene, they discovered a strange detail. Beside the body was a glass of soju and a partially consumed bottle still standing upright, not knocked over. The boiler system was set to operate on 3-hour cycles. Analyzing these factors, experts determined that Mr. Choi was sitting alone drinking in the room when an intruder entered and attacked him with a blunt object to the back of the head, causing immediate death. But a big question quickly emerged in the investigators' minds. If the main door was tightly locked from inside with a 27-inch chain lock, how could the killer have entered and then escaped? The answer began to emerge when they found traces of the killer both inside and outside the restaurant. Although the main door was tightly locked and inaccessible without cutting the lock, there was a secret escape route. A side door leading to the outside bathroom area. And right there, the bloody footprint, the only valuable clue, was discovered. The killer apparently used this little-known passage to execute their perfect crime, then vanished like a ghost into the night. The investigation team discovered more details about the killer's escape route. If one opened the side door leading to the bathroom and continued outside, there was a narrow path leading to the street, only needing to cross a low wall to completely escape. On this very wall, investigators discovered suspicious bloodstains, showing signs that the killer had touched it with gloved hands. This detail confirmed that the murderer had used this secret passage both when breaking in and when escaping after committing the crime. The killer's familiarity with this little-known passage was an important clue. Almost certainly this must be someone familiar with the restaurant's structure, possibly a regular customer, someone who had worked there, or even someone living in the area. The autopsy results revealed a painful picture of the victim's final moments. The cause of death was determined to be severe head trauma. Mr. Choi had multiple severe bone fractures on his head, all caused by a blunt object approximately 3 centimeters, 1.2 inches, in diameter. Notably, the victim was struck hard at least 8 times, a number of blows far exceeding what was necessary to cause death, suggesting an action driven by deep hatred. Mr. Choi had many defensive wounds on his hands, showing he tried to protect his head after the first attack. However, it's noteworthy that there were no signs of a strong struggle or escape attempt, suggesting the victim may have been caught by surprise while intoxicated or semi-conscious. Investigators sketched a possible scenario. Mr. Choi, after drinking heavily, had fallen asleep in the enclosed room. Taking advantage of this moment, the killer snuck in through the secret passage. When the victim was awakened by the noise, perhaps he didn't have time to clearly see the attacker's face before receiving a fatal blow to the back of his head. The search for the murder weapon led investigators to a surprising discovery: a round-headed hammer hidden in a toolbox under the restaurant's floor. This weapon showed signs of having been carefully washed clean to remove blood traces, a detail indicating the killer's careful calculation. Forensic analysis from the National Institute of Science only detected the victim's blood on the weapon, with no other biological traces. Another notable clue emerged when investigators found blood on a knife in the kitchen area. Strangely, the body had no wounds caused by a knife, indicating the knife wasn't the direct murder weapon. Criminal behavior experts offered a reasonable hypothesis. The killer might not have been confident in their ability to subdue the victim with just the hammer, so they prepared the knife as a backup plan. This detail suggested the physical characteristics of the killer, likely someone without enough strength to overpower a 60-year-old man, possibly someone of similar age to the victim, or someone with a small build. The clues at the scene not only helped reconstruct the crime, but also revealed the psychological profile and characteristics of the killer, a fascinating angle in criminal investigation. At the time of the crime, Mr. Choi's family situation had a notable detail. His wife was in Seoul, helping their eldest daughter prepare for her wedding, leaving him alone to run the restaurant. The question arose, did the killer know about Mr. Choi being alone? A perfect opportunity to commit the crime? According to witness statements, the picture of Mr. Choi's final hours gradually emerged. Around 9:30 p.m. on October 19th, a couple running a nearby shoe store noticed the restaurant lights were still on and stopped by. They found Mr. Choi sitting alone, enjoying soju with pork as a snack. Though invited to join him for a drink, the couple politely declined and left. An hour and a half later, at 10:50 p.m., a neighbor passing by caught a glimpse of Mr. Choi through the window, still continuing his solitary drinking. The final clue about the victim's last conscious moments came from a nearby karaoke bar owner who saw Mr. Choi standing in front of the restaurant around 1:30 a.m. on October 20th. Perhaps at this time he had gone outside to check and close up before returning inside to continue drinking and eventually falling asleep. Based on witness testimonies, investigators narrowed down the time frame of the crime, from when Mr. Choi was last seen at 1:30 a.m. until the delivery person discovered the incident at 10 a.m. For more precise determination, they combined this with forensic analysis of the amount of alcohol Mr. Choi typically consumed and the remaining alcohol concentration in his blood, thus identifying the likely time of death as between 4:30 and 5 a.m. Although the restaurant was located in the bustling Central Dane district, the late-night area was deserted and had no surveillance camera system. Perfect conditions for the killer. In efforts to find clues, police analyzed data from about 600 mobile phone users in the same transmission tower coverage area during the time frame from 4:30 to 5 a.m., but didn't detect any anomalies. Thus, the only valuable clue the killer left behind remained the solitary footprint near the side door. In an important step forward, investigators found a pair of shoes with the same sole pattern as the footprint at a large nearby supermarket. They thoroughly checked all 97 people who had purchased these shoes, but unfortunately none matched the suspect profile. The crime scene had blood splattered up to the ceiling, so police surmised that the killer's clothes must have been blood-stained. From this detail, investigators deduced that the killer's clothes must also have been stained with much of the victim's blood. They expanded their investigation to all laundry shops in the area, hoping to find suspicious blood-stained clothes. But once again, this lead also ended in a dead end. The big question remained: what motivated the killer to murder Mr. Choi? Initially, police leaned toward the theory this was a targeted robbery. The main reason came from the disappearance of two valuable pieces of the victim's jewelry: a gold watch worth about 3 million won, approximately $2,700, and a ring worth 600,000 won, about $540. These items held not just material value, but deep sentimental meaning. They were gifts from his wife 20 years ago, and Mr. Choi always wore them. However, a notable detail was that when examining the victim's left ring finger, where he usually wore his ring, investigators discovered scraped skin, showing the killer used force to remove the ring from his hand. Immediately after the crime, police quickly added information about the watch and ring to the search list at all jewelry stores in the Gwangju area and South Jeolla province, but yielded no results. As the investigation dug deeper, the initial theory of a simple robbery was shaken by many suspicious details. Investigators couldn't ignore the obvious contradictions: the door locked from inside, the murder weapon, the round-headed hammer, not taken away but still hidden in the restaurant, at a location only someone familiar would know. Especially, there were no signs of a major struggle or disturbance, and 70,000 won, about $63 cash on the victim, remained untouched. What robber would ignore easily accessible cash to focus only on jewelry? Perhaps the most chilling detail was the attack method. The killer didn't stop after the first blow that likely brought the victim down, but continued hitting Mr. Choi's head 8 times, a 60-year-old man no longer able to resist. This level of violence far exceeded the needs of a normal robbery, suggesting a deeper motive. Perhaps this was a murder driven by hatred cleverly disguised as a robbery. With the new investigative direction, police began scrutinizing people around the victim more closely. Through this process, a different picture of Mr. Choi gradually emerged. This man was not an easygoing neighbor as his outward appearance suggested. After brain surgery 5 years ago, his personality had changed significantly, becoming irritable and aggressive, leading to many conflicts with those living around him. Additionally, his restaurant regularly hosted card games lasting into the late night, causing noise and loud arguments. During the investigation, one noteworthy character stood out, Mr. A, owner of a nearby restaurant, who had serious friction with the victim. Their conflict originated from an unpleasant incident. Mr. Choi had visited Mr. A's restaurant, ordered soju and snacks to enjoy, but then left without paying. When stopped and questioned, Mr. Choi insisted he had paid, igniting a fierce argument. The situation escalated when Mr. A's son also joined the dispute, ultimately leading to a major fight between the 3 men. With such direct enmity, police placed everyone involved in this conflict on the priority suspect list. However, after careful comparison, none of them had footprints matching the one found at the crime scene. With physical evidence not matching, they had to be removed from the suspect list. Undeterred, investigators continued broadening their view to other residents in the same building. A new figure emerged in their sights, Mr. Kim, 62, who had been renting a long-term room on the 2nd floor of the building. Mr. Kim wasn't a newcomer. He had lived there for about 6 years, paying room rent regularly at the rate of 8,000 won, about $7 per day. Mr. Kim quickly became the focus of the investigation because of a suspicious detail that couldn't be ignored. He had mysteriously disappeared right after the crime occurred. When delving into the relationship between Mr. Kim and the victim, investigators discovered they had previously had conflicts. The cause stemmed from an unfortunate misunderstanding. Mr. Choi, due to poor eyesight after brain surgery, often had a habit of squinting when looking at others. Mr. Kim was unaware of this health issue and misinterpreted that look as an unfriendly glare, leading to tense arguments between the two. What made Mr. Kim the prime suspect was his reaction after Mr. Choi's death. When police flooded the crime scene, Mr. Kim hurriedly packed his belongings, announced he needed to go sell toothpaste, his main occupation, and then suddenly vanished without a trace. Additionally, according to statements from those living nearby, the black shoes Mr. Kim regularly wore had patterns very similar to the footprint found at the crime scene. The more they learned about Mr. Kim, the more investigators were drawn into a mysterious character. According to information gathered, he made a living selling toothpaste and socks to service facility employees in the Gwangju area and South Jeolla province, with supplies from a factory in the distant Gyeonggi province. But strangely, after 6 years living at the boarding house, no one in the area knew his real name. When ordering supplies, he didn't use his real name, but borrowed the name of the boarding house owner where he resided. When receiving goods from the factory, he also used a fake name. More significantly, he completely avoided easily traceable payment methods like credit cards or ATMs, only conducting transactions through bank transfers. Even the recipient names in these transactions were all fake. The strange truth emerged. Mr. Kim, the ordinary toothpaste seller, had lived in the same place for 6 long years but left no trace of himself. No contact information, no fingerprints, not a single personal detail that could authenticate his identity. He was like a ghost living among ordinary people, a nameless man with a carefully hidden past. The only effort that helped police obtain Mr. Kim's image was through surveillance cameras at a nearby bank. From those blurry images, they identified his features. A man with white hair, robust build, about 5 feet 7 inches tall. At this point, all clues about Mr. Kim seemed exhausted. After 2 months of relentless investigation since the crime occurred, in December 2008, police were confident enough to identify Mr. Kim as the main suspect and publicly issued a warrant for his arrest on murder charges. Flyers with Mr. Kim's image were distributed throughout the country, but he seemed to have completely vanished into thin air. No one provided valuable information about the whereabouts of this mysterious man. Indeed, tracking down someone who had carefully erased their traces and hidden their true identity to such a degree was an almost impossible challenge. Mr. Kim had built an invisible wall protecting his secret, leaving investigators at a dead end. However, 4 years later, in 2012, a ray of hope appeared when the cold case investigation team from Gwangju Police Department decided to reopen the file. With persistence and a creative approach, they made an amazing breakthrough. Investigators came up with a bold but promising plan. Search for Mr. Kim's fingerprints on bank transfer receipts he had used in the past. With iron determination, they visited 23 different bank branches and laboriously collected about 100 receipts believed to have been written by Mr. Kim himself. Initially, when sending these papers to the National Institute of Science for analysis, the returned result was "cannot be analyzed," seemingly facing another wall, but the investigation team refused to give up. After many search efforts, they contacted a paper fingerprint analysis expert from a university who possessed a more sophisticated system. And finally, though faint, a specific fingerprint was identified, the first important piece to decode the mysterious man's true identity. Although they had identified the fingerprint, Mr. Kim's full identity remained a mystery, as his residence records had long been deleted. Investigators faced an extremely complex situation: a person who hadn't used credit cards or mobile phones for many years, making it extremely difficult to determine whether he was alive or dead. With more detailed information from the fingerprint, the investigation team issued a new nationwide public wanted notice, more complete than previous flyers. This time, they truly had reason to hope. And then, after 3 years of persistence since reopening the investigation, in October 2015, a light appeared at the end of the tunnel. A noteworthy tip was reported. Someone resembling the wanted subject is selling fruit in front of an agricultural bank in Gwangju. With good intuition, police immediately went to the scene and apprehended Mr. Kim, the mysterious man now selling fruit at a small stall. When asked for his ID number, Mr. Kim quickly recited a sequence of numbers fluently, but his act was quickly exposed. It was actually his brother's ID number. Now, they needed to determine whether Mr. Kim was actually the killer or not. Mr. Kim completely denied the crime and began explaining why he had fled after Mr. Choi's death. He said that during the IMF financial crisis, he had been accused of embezzling about 2 million won, approximately $1,800, from his company. He had avoided paying the debt for many years. When the murder occurred at Mr. Choi's house downstairs and police began coming in and out of the area, he feared his true identity would be discovered, so he fled. That was also why he always used fake names and concealed his identity. The story took an unexpected turn. When police thoroughly checked Mr. Kim's records, they discovered he truly was wanted, but not for serious charges like embezzlement or large-scale fraud of 2 million won as they thought. Instead, he was only wanted for violating the Military Service Act and the Local Reserve Forces Establishment Act, with a mere fine of about 200,000 won, approximately $180, a much lighter offense than initially suspected. In this difficult situation to determine the truth, police used a lie detector to interrogate Mr. Kim. The result was surprising. Mr. Kim was telling the truth. He was not the murderer the police were looking for. To be more certain, they even hired a professional criminal profiler for analysis, but the results still found no motive or evidence connecting Mr. Kim to the bloody murder. Police's final hope rested on the only remaining clue, the footprint at the crime scene. But a harsh truth emerged. Based on the footprint, the killer's shoe size was estimated between 240 to 255 millimeters, or U.S. men's size 6 to 7, while Mr. Kim's feet were much larger, about 275 millimeters, U.S. men's size 9.5, a difference too significant to ignore. Finally, the investigation team couldn't establish any connection between Mr. Kim and the restaurant murder, forcing them to release him and continue the journey to find the real killer. The statute of limitations for prosecuting violations of the Military Service Act had also expired, so Mr. Kim was released one day after his arrest. After 7 years of relentless investigation, the team had sketched a profile of the mysterious killer, a person about 5 feet 7 inches tall, weighing between 154 and 163 pounds. More importantly, the clues showed the killer was certainly someone familiar with the victim and the restaurant, someone who knew the side door leading to the outside bathroom area, was familiar with the location of the hammer in the toolbox under the floor, and perhaps even knew that Mr. Choi's wife was away in Seoul. All these details suggest the killer might have been someone very close to the Choi family. The killer's carefulness, wearing gloves when committing the crime, leaving only a single footprint at the scene, shows the crime was carefully planned, aimed at stealing Mr. Choi's valuable possessions. To this day, the case remains unsolved, classified as a robbery-homicide where the main suspect has vanished without a trace. Mr. Choi's older brother, worried his brother's case would be forgotten, approached the cold case investigation team. He emotionally shared that he never expected police would put so much effort into finding the killer, and if he could meet his brother in dreams, perhaps he would feel a little more at peace. As the police investigation team said, the most frightening thing isn't death, but an unjust death completely buried in human memory. I also hope that the quiet, relentless efforts of dedicated investigators will not be in vain, and the real killer will soon be brought to light so that injustice and hatred can finally be resolved. Closing the curtain on these two tragic stories, we see a picture of the fragility of justice and the pain behind each case. On one side is Jung, the young mother who pushed her entire family into the abyss of desperation amid inescapable economic hardships, sentenced to 20 years in prison after her 3 children died in a sea of flames. On the other side is Mr. Choi, a 60-year-old man who just wanted to enjoy his solitary glass of soju late at night, brutally murdered in his own restaurant by a villain who is still in hiding. Both cases remind us that no crime is perfect, whether a lonely footprint, a faint bloodstain, or desperate messages sent in the late night, all can become keys unlocking the door to truth. And most importantly, we are reminded that behind each case are real people, real pain, and families still waiting for some peace when justice is served. And that concludes today's cases. What are your thoughts on these cases? Please share in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next videos.